There is a small village in Hungary where the roads are narrow, the winters are long, and people mostly keep to themselves. Not much happens there. The same families have lived on the same streets for generations. Everyone knows everyone. And yet, on one cold November morning, the whole village stopped what it was doing and watched an old man do something they had never seen before. His name was Dénes. He was 73 years old. His back was not what it used to be. His knees ached on cold mornings, which in that part of the world meant they ached almost every morning. He had rough, thick hands from decades of work in the land, a quiet way of talking, and the kind of face that has seen enough of life to stop being surprised by most of it. But that morning, Dénes was doing something that surprised even the people who thought they knew him well. He was strapping a piano to his back, not a small keyboard, not a toy, a full, heavy, real upright piano. A 1960s Soviet-era instrument that had sat in his front room for over 40 years. The wood was scratched. Some of the keys had yellowed, but it still worked. It still sung. And that, to Dénes, was all that mattered. His neighbors watched from behind their curtains. A few of them stepped outside. Nobody laughed. Nobody told him he was being foolish, though most of them were thinking it. They just watched, quietly, as this old man tightened the straps on the wooden frame he had built himself, straightened his coat, and began to walk. Nobody fully understood what they were watching yet, but they would. To understand why Dénes did what he did, you have to go back 6 months. You have to go back to a hospital room, and a little girl, and a conversation that changed everything. Her name was Lili. She was his granddaughter, 9 years old, small for her age, with dark curly hair that never stayed where she put it, and a way of looking at people like she was always thinking about something they hadn't said yet. She was the kind of child who made a room feel more alive just by walking into it, and she loved the piano more than almost anything. She had started playing when she was 7. Nobody pushed her into it. She had simply sat down at her grandfather's old piano one afternoon during a visit, pressed a few keys, and never really stopped. She practiced without being told. She played the same song over and over until her fingers knew it without thinking. She was not a prodigy. She would have laughed at that word. But she played with real feeling. When Lili played, you listened. That old piano had been her grandmother's Dénes' wife had played it for. Decades before she passed away, 4 years earlier. There was something about Lili sitting at that piano that Dénes could never quite put into words. It felt like a thread connecting things that grief had tried to separate. He never told her that. He just always made sure the piano was tuned when she came to visit. Then came the diagnosis. The doctors explained it carefully, the way doctors do when they are trying to be kind and honest at the same time. Lili had a degenerative nerve condition, a problem that was slowly affecting the feeling in her fingers. Not all at once, not overnight, but steadily, quietly, like a candle being turned down, one small notch at a time. They said she would need intensive treatment at a rehabilitation center in the city, about 40 kilometers away. They said she would be there for 3 months. They talked about therapy and exercises and timelines and progress. Dénes nodded at all of it. He sat in that hospital chair with his big rough hands folded in his lap, and he nodded and he said very little. But on the drive home, something settled in his chest. Not panic, not anger. Something quieter than both of those things. Decision. Lili could not bring her piano to the rehabilitation center. The family had looked into it. Moving a piano that size, that these stands cost more money than they had. Professional movers quoted prices that were simply out of reach, and the piano was old. The kind of old where ordinary transport companies looked at it and shook their heads. Too heavy, too fragile, too complicated. So it seemed like it was settled. Lili would go to the center. The piano would stay behind. She would be without it for 3 months, during what was already going to be the hardest stretch of her young life. Dénes said nothing about this to anyone. He just went home, walked into his yard, and started cutting timber. For 3 weeks, he worked on a wooden carrying frame, the kind you strap across your shoulders and back, like a hiking pack, but built to hold something far heavier. He worked in the evenings, after his other tasks were done. He measured and adjusted. He tested different ways of distributing the weight. He did not rush. When the frame was finished, he loaded it with stones, roughly the same weight as the piano, and walked laps around his property. Again and again, he wore through a pair of boots doing it. He didn't tell his son what he was planning, because his son would have tried to stop him. He didn't tell Lili, because Lili would have told him absolutely not, and then felt guilty for weeks and told no one. He just prepared. The morning he finally set out, the ground was hard with frost and the sky was the pale gray of old metal. He had packed bread, a thermos of tea, and one change of clothes in a small bag. The piano, nearly 90 kilograms, sat strapped to the frame on his back. He took the first step. It was harder than the stones had been. The weight shifted differently. The road was uneven. Within the first kilometer, he could feel the pressure building across his shoulders and lower back. He breathed slowly. He adjusted. He kept moving. By midday, he had covered 6 kilometers. Not fast, not graceful, but forward. Always forward. By the end of the first day, he had made it 11 kilometers before his legs gave out on a stretch of road between 2 empty fields. He sat down right there, beside the piano, on the frozen ground. He ate his bread. He drank his tea. The fields were silent in every direction. He thought about his wife. He always thought about her when things were hard. She had been the one with words in their marriage. He had always been better with actions. She used to tease him about it. Asterisk, you'd rather dig a ditch than say how you feel. Asterisk, he smiled at the memory. Alone on the side of that cold road. After about 20 minutes, he stood back up, and he kept walking. By the third day, something unexpected happened. A truck driver coming down the main road slowed when he saw the old man. He stared for a long moment at the sight. This elderly figure, bent forward under the enormous weight of a piano, moving steadily along the roadside. The driver pulled over, took a photograph, and posted it online without much of a caption. Just the image. Eat, spread, fast. People who saw it didn't quite know what to make of it at first. It looked almost unreal, like something from a film or a dream. An old man carrying a piano down an empty country road. No explanation. Just the image and the quiet, unshakable determination written into every line of his posture. Within hours, people were asking questions. Who was he? Where was he going? Why? And when the story began to come out, piece by piece, shared by people in the village, confirmed by his son, who by now had found out and was equal parts furious and heartbroken, the comments stopped being questions. They went quiet instead, because some things, when you finally understand them, don't need a response. Some things just need to be witnessed. Dénes was still walking. He had no idea the world was watching. He didn't need an audience. He had a destination. He had a granddaughter, and he had 40 kilometers still ahead of him. So he walked, and nobody told Lili what was coming. She had been at the rehabilitation center for almost 2 weeks by that point. The place was clean and well-run, with kind staff and long corridors and windows that looked out onto a small courtyard. The people there were doing everything right. The therapy was structured. The doctors were patient. Everyone around her was trying their best. But Lili was struggling. Not with the exercises. Not with the medical side of things. She did what she was told. Sissa weighed up. She worked through the sessions without complaining, but there was something behind her eyes that the nurses noticed, a kind of flatness that had not been there before, like a light that was still on, but dimmer than it should have been. She missed home. She missed her parents. She missed the ordinary sounds of a normal day. And somewhere underneath all of that, though she never said it out loud, she missed the piano. She missed the way playing it made everything inside her head go quiet. She missed having somewhere to put all the feelings that were too big and too tangled to explain to anyone. The therapy for her hands was helping, the doctor said. Progress was slow but real. That was the honest truth. But slow progress is a hard thing to hold on to when you are 9 years old and far from home, and the feeling in your fingers comes and goes like a radio signal that keeps dropping out. She was sitting in the common room on a Tuesday afternoon, not really watching the television, when she heard it. At first she thought she had imagined it. It was faint, drifting in through the window from somewhere outside. A melody. Simple, a little unsteady. Played slowly like the person playing it was finding each note one at a time. It was not a perfect sound. It was not a professional sound, but there was something about it that made Lili go very still. She knew that song. She had played it herself 100 times. She stood up and walked to the window. Down in the courtyard below, there was a small crowd gathered. Nurses, a few other patients, some people she had never seen before. Strangers who had apparently followed this moment from somewhere further away than she could imagine. They were all standing in a loose circle, and in the middle of that circle, surrounded by the cold November air and the pale afternoon light, was her grandfather. Dénes was sitting on an upturned crate in front of an old upright piano. His coat was dusty. His boots were worn down in a way they hadn't been the last time she saw him. His face was tired, deeply tired. The way a person looks when their body has been asked to do something far beyond what is reasonable. But he was sitting straight. And he was playing 2 fingers. That was all he ever used. He had never really learned properly. He had just watched his wife play for so many years that a few simple melodies had made their way into his hands without him ever sitting down to study them. It was not skillful. It was not smooth, but it was real, and it was for her. And somehow that made it the most beautiful thing she had ever heard in her life. Lili did not move for a long moment. She just stood at the window and looked at him. At the piano, at the wooden carrying frame leaning against the courtyard wall behind him, the strap still attached, the wood marked from days of use on hard country roads. It took her a few seconds to understand what she was seeing. And then, when she understood it, when the full weight of what he had done landed on her, she turned and ran. She came through the courtyard door and crossed the space between them fast, and Dénes looked up from the keys just in time to see her coming. He stood. She reached him, and that was it. Nobody photographed that moment. Nobody thought to. The nurses who were standing nearby said later that it simply didn't occur to anyone to reach for a phone. You don't reach for a phone when something like that happens in front of you. You just stand there and feel grateful to be close to it. What was heard, clearly, by everyone in that courtyard, was Lili's voice, one question, muffled against her grandfather's coat. How did you get it here? And Dénes, who was never a man of many words, who had always been more comfortable with actions than explanations, said simply, I carried it. After a while, after the tears and the questions and the moment when his son arrived, red-faced and emotional, having driven behind his father for the last stretch of the journey without Dénes ever knowing. After all of that settled, something quiet happened. Lili sat down at the piano. She placed her hands on the keys the way she always had, carefully, naturally, like greeting something familiar. The feeling in her fingers was not what it used to be. Some notes she pressed harder than necessary because the feedback wasn't clear. Some runs she had to slow down, not from lack of practice, but from lack of sensation. It was different from before. Sam knew that, but she played. She played for about 15 minutes, there in the open courtyard, with the small crowd still watching. She played pieces she knew by heart. She played through the parts where her fingers didn't cooperate, working around them quietly, adjusting without stopping. And when she finished, she sat for a moment with her hands resting on the keys, looking down at them. Nobody said anything for a little while. The staff at the rehabilitation center noticed a change in Lili in the weeks that followed. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. But it was consistent, and it was real. She engaged more in her sessions. She pushed further through the difficult parts of her hand therapy rather than stopping at the edge of discomfort. She asked more questions. She seemed, the lead therapist later said, like someone who had remembered why she was doing all of this. Whether the piano caused that, or whether it was something else. The weight of what her grandfather had done, the knowledge of it, the sheer impossible love of it. Nobody could say for certain. These things are hard to measure, but the change was there, and the people who worked with her every day were clear about when it started. It started the day the piano arrived in the courtyard. Dénes stayed in the city for 3 days before going home. He slept on a cot in his son's apartment and did not complain once, though he was sore in ways he probably should have seen a doctor about and didn't. In the evenings he sat with Lili when visiting hours allowed, not saying much, the way he never did. Sometimes she played for him on the piano, which the center had agreed to keep in the courtyard for the duration of her stay. Sometimes they just sat. Before he left to go back to the village, Lili asked him something. She asked him if it was hard. The walking, the weight. All of it. He thought about it for a moment, which was his way. He always thought before he spoke, which is rarer than it sounds. Then he said, "Not as hard as watching you go through this without something that makes you feel like yourself." She didn't have an answer for that. She just nodded, slowly, the way you nod when something true lands somewhere deep and settles there. Lili recovered significant movement and feeling in both hands over the following year. It was not instant. It was not without setbacks, but she kept playing through all of it, and she kept getting better at navigating what her hands could and couldn't do. And eventually, the gap between the two narrowed into something she could live inside of comfortably. The old piano was donated to the rehabilitation center when her treatment ended. Dénes made the decision himself, without being asked. He said the center had other children who might need it. He said his wife would have agreed. A small handwritten note was taped to the side of the piano before it was moved inside permanently. The staff found it there one morning and left it exactly where it was. Nobody removed it. Nobody felt they should. It said, asterisk, for anyone who needs to remember that someone carried this for you. Asterisk. That note is still there today.